Hello, I'm Janet Tyson, and you're watching WDCN Channel 8, our public television station.
We were going to have a future in America for our children, our children's children. We had to demonstrate our loyalty. And we felt that the best way to demonstrate that was to prove on the battlefield that we were just as good as any other Americans.
Drug tests have no way of showing either of those two things.
But it shows a trend, though, Edward. That shows a trend that someone is on drugs, that they could cause accidents.
Mama was the person there sort of getting the Social Security checks to people and making sure that everybody, all the various political factions were stopping warring, at least through Daddy's campaign. And she really was running the place for a very long time.
Modern Maturity, a weekly series on today's mature Americans and tomorrow's, is brought to you as a public service by AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, and its 23 million members.
Welcome to Modern Maturity. I'm Carol Bennett. This week, we'll look at how the relationship among a mother and her two daughters has motivated them all to greater achievements. Edwin Newman talks with a presidential advisor and a constitutional lawyer about whether employers should routinely screen their workers for drug use and abuse. And John Daly brings an Armistice Day salute. But first, we're going to visit with some members of the Nisei regiment, which fought for the United States in many bitter campaigns in World War II. Nisei means second-generation Japanese Americans. These soldiers fought valiantly abroad, while at home, their families and friends were incarcerated in detention camps. Ted Powers reports.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, the American public was stunned. But shock soon turned to rage. All Japanese Americans were viewed with suspicion. In some Western states, anti-Japanese sentiment became a device for gaining control of their property and businesses, with the exception of Hawaii. The Japanese Americans were forced from their homes to internment centers. It was a time of bitterness and fear. The Nisei, second-generation Japanese Americans, tried to counter that fear. In growing numbers, they volunteered for an army that distrusted them. These young men would become an extraordinary fighting force. At maximum strength, their combat team numbered only 4,500 men, and yet they earned over 18,000 individual decorations for bravery.
I'm from Seattle. After war was declared, I was evacuated from the Pacific coast. When the call came for volunteers for a combat team, I volunteered from a relocation center to show my loyalty and to prove that I had the right to live as a good American citizen.
Mike Masaoka knows how that young soldier felt.
If we were going to have a future in America for our children, our children's children, we had to demonstrate our loyalty. And we felt that the best way to demonstrate that was to prove on the battlefield that we were just as good as any other Americans, that our blood was just as red, and our future was entwined with theirs.
The story of the Japanese-American community will be told in an exhibit at the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. Tim Crouch is the curator.
Americans of Japanese ancestry had suffered prejudice really from the time of their first coming to the United States, the very beginning of immigration in the 1880s. They had been not allowed to own land in the state of California. They'd been forced into segregated school situations.
Tom, what will we learn from this exhibit?
I hope the specific lesson that people carry away from this show is that the basic guarantees of the Constitution, the First 10 Amendments, the Bill of Rights, it's incredibly important to guard those.
Veterans of the Japanese-American combat team came to Washington to share memories. Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii lost an arm in combat in Italy. He met with fellow vets, Mike Masaoka and Kelly Kuwayama.
You were able to overcome so many obstacles during your tour of duty that you were known as courageous and also as fearless. Did anything frighten you?
I think everything frightened us. We were not superhuman, but as Mike pointed out, we had a burden to overcome, an obstacle to clear away the doubts
How did soldiers from other units treat you?
I think we got the respect and the recognition by other American combat troops. And the greatest compliment, I think, was that officers always said that if we had the 442nd on our flanks, they felt safe.
We became, during the last 8 months of our service overseas, the prime assault troop of the European theater. And so whenever there was a line to be broken, we were the ones called in. The Lost Battalion, for example, this was a Texas battalion. They were surrounded by a full German division. We were called upon from another sector to break through this German line to relieve and rescue the members of the Texas battalion, which we did successfully at a very, very high cost. We had over 300 casualties.
Mike Masaoka recalls the loss of his brother Ben.
My brother was killed in the rescue of the Lost Battalion. With 3 other brothers already wounded in hospital, he and I were the only ones left in the regiment. He was asked to stay behind and guard headquarters, perimeter guard. But because our frontline troops in the rescue of the Lost Battalion were so thin, he volunteered and he never came back.
All the men and women buried at Arlington National Cemetery are by definition heroic. But Ben Masaoka was one of a unique group of World War II American soldiers, the Japanese Americans called Nisei. These brave men had to fight not only our enemies, but also the suspicions of their fellow citizens. Theirs is a story of triumph over injustice.
Now, a modern maturity perspective on drug testing in the workplace with Arthur Brill of the President's Commission on Organized Crime and Elizabeth Simons, staff attorney of the American Civil Liberties Union. Our correspondent, Edwin Newman.
Well, Mr. Brill, let's plunge right in. Should there be testing for drugs in the workplace?
Well, we think there should be because we feel that drugs have invaded our society. It has invaded the workplace from the executive suite to the assembly line, and it has affected all types of workers. We estimate that 3 to 7% of the workers every day are on drugs. And the only way that you're going to be able to find out if you're on drugs is to test, because it serves as a deterrent.
What do you mean by on drugs? You mean that they're working under the effect of drugs, under the influence of drugs?
Of illegal narcotics. We're not talking about alcohol, tobacco, or anything like that. We're talking about cocaine, marijuana, and other illegal drugs. 3 to 7%. So this could be airline pilots, it could be brain surgeons, it could be people who fix your car, it could be people who look at your teeth. It's a real concern.
Simon, should there be testing for drugs in the workplace?
No, generally there shouldn't be. These are an incredible invasion of personal privacy. They're a search where there's no warrant and no individualized suspicion in most cases. And sadly, they don't work. They don't make our workplace any safer. They don't test for present on-the-job intoxication. They may at best show whether somebody smoked marijuana 2 weeks ago at a party on a Saturday night, but they don't show whether the workplace is safer or more dangerous because somebody is presently intoxicated. Our technology simply can't show that right now.
You accept that, Mr. Brewer?
Well, I don't at all. Drug users are only 2/3 as productive as normal workers. They cause about 3 times the accidents.
But do you accept that the tests are not effective?
Oh, they are very much effective if you do them right. If you use good personnel, if you use good, procedures. The Marine Corps, for example, Edward. 5 years ago, 40% of their enlisted personnel, roughly 46%, tested positive for marijuana. They started testing 5 years ago. It is now down to about 7%, only because of testing. It serves as a deterrent, and that's important.
If you accept that there is something in the nature of a drug epidemic, how would you deal with it if you wouldn't do it by testing?
There are lots of different ways. First, I think supervisors need to be aware of how their employees are acting.